welcome back to my channel. I'm Lucy and I love to show how I make things. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a really simple fleece hat. Absolutely ideal for the winter as it's on its way. Now I make these for my daughter because she has a genetic mutation syndrome that means that her head actually grows bigger than the average child, and unfortunately that also means that she now has to wear a men's extra large size hat, which means that they're not very fun or exciting. So I make my own for her. So this is one that I've made out of polar fleece. It's double thickness, so it's actually using two different types of fleece. So it's reversible as well, so one day she might like it as leopard print and the next day she can have it paw prints. She really likes animals, so that's why we chose this. Anyway, let's get on. So you want to measure from ear to ear, and you also want to measure from forehead to the back, but the most important measurement that you want to do is around the forehead and around the back of the head, all the way around. Now my daughter's comes out at about 60 centimetres. Like I said earlier, that is quite big. So just measure round. That is the most important measurement that you'll need for making one of these hats. Write down your measurements, so mine is 60 and 44 for both of the front to back and the side to side. Write them down and make sure you know what they are. The other two are just for cross-checking later on. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so here we are, ready to go. I've got my tailor's chalk ready, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure on the material half of her head circumference. So her head circumference was 60, so I'm going to measure 30, but I'm actually going to measure 33 because I want to make sure I leave a seam allowance. So I'm going to find 33 there. Draw a nice clear tailor's chalk line. Tailor's chalk is amazing. If you don't use it, you should start using it because it's really good. Okay. So that's there. Now we also measured from the top to the back, which was 44 for her. So I'm going to now go find the centre of this line. So it was 33, so you want to find 15, 16, 16 and a half is our centre point-ish. If you're a mathematician, I'm sure you can work it out quicker than me. Maths was never my strong point. Okay, and then from there, we're going to go up to 22 centimetres up, straight as you can. To here, I'm going to draw a nice line all the way down. So this is the size. Now obviously the hat is going to be rounded, not straight. So what we're going to do is first we're going to have some tea. That's important. We have roughly the size that we're going to need. So we're going to cut this fabric. And then where I've got this line here, this 22, obviously we want to go slightly higher than that. We want to allow for seam allowance. I'm actually going to use a different colour to show where my seam allowance is. I'm going to add, put just a few centimetres onto that. About 3 centimetres. I always like big seam allowances. I don't like to not give myself enough room. I end up making a mess then. Right, I'm going to put my ruler here and I'm going to make sure that I fold this over the ruler. It's a little tip. Okay. And then I'm going to hold it together with some clips. These wonderful clips that I bought. Just like this. And I'm going to turn it around the other way. I think I need another clip on there. Okay, I just didn't want it to start going on. Didn't want it to start going moving around too much. Okay, so there we go. You can sort of see from where the clips are what would naturally then become a seam allowance. So this line here is straight. This line here is straightish. I've got my seam allowance there. The next thing to do is to actually cut the shape. So I want it to have a nice arc going up like this. Now if I do both sides separately, what will happen inevitably is that one side will be wonky and the other side will be perfect. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do one side and then use that side as a template on the other. Okay, so to make the actual curve of the hat, I'm going to use my French curve ruler. I'm not going to use it completely properly. I'm just going to use it as a guide to get the sort of curve that I'm wanting. So I'm going to put this edge right up to the end of the line, and I'm going to put this end. I'm not going to follow this exactly because it's this shape that I want. Now, if you're doing this at home, you're just going to have to work out what looks right to your eye for the first half. Think about what shape hats are. If you've got other hats at home, use them to have a good idea. But it does need to curve. Heads generally curve, okay? So I'm going to mark this up to about here, I think. So make sure that mark's nice and clear. Sometimes tailor's chalk doesn't mark very clearly. And actually this is quite a hard fabric to see the chalk on, so I'm going to give that a good mark to there. Now I'm not going to go all the way with the French curve. Now I'm just going to do a little bit of freehand. Oh, broke my chalk. A bit of freehand all the way up to the centre point. Now to make sure the other side looks exactly the same, because that's really important with things like this, I'm going to cut them at the same time. So I'm going to take my material, I'm going to fold it along that line that we drew earlier, that was her front to back size, her half front to back size. I've got a small cutting mat here that I'm going to use. I'm going to put that on top of my cutting mat. Make sure that my material is nice and together. Now this is only going to make 2 halves. We need to make 4 halves for it to become a complete thing. So just going to get my rotary cutter. Okay, if you don't have a rotary cutter, I suggest you get one. They're not that expensive. I think I picked mine up for about £5 off the internet, but they are really, really good. It's much better than cutting with scissors, because you actually get a really, really neat sharp cut and the material's not moving around all over the place. So if you don't have one, I suggest you get one. Now I'm just adding a few clips onto this, just so that it sort of keeps it a bit more steady as I'm cutting. Now down the bottom here, if I mark this shape out a bit clearer, it's not very clear. We've got this line going along the bottom, drawn on my tablecloth. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leave this bottom bit. I'm not going to cut along here, I'm just going to cut the curve. I'm going to leave that, and I'm going to cut straight on that line, because we have already allowed a few centimetres seam allowance. If you haven't, then cut slightly to the edge of the line. Some people like to cut away from the line and then they've got a line to follow, which you could do. But I'm actually going to cut almost on the line. I always assume I've measured incorrectly. So I like to leave extra. It's always best to leave more seam allowance and cut it out later than not enough. So just give it a good firm press. If you are using rotary cutters, just be really careful that your fingers are out of the way when you're cutting, because they are really, really sharp. Okay, so now we have, undo my clip there, we have 2 bits of material that are absolutely identical, but we need 4. So now I'm going to put this onto the rest of the red material, and I'm going to cut another set exactly the same. Okay, so now I have 4 halves. So this would be enough to make 2 single lined hats, but we're making a double lined hat because if you remember last year in Britain it got very, very cold and snowy. Now you remember I said we were leaving this, but what I'm going to do, I'm just going to neaten it up. So the first thing I want to do is to make that line really obvious on the bottom with my blue chalk. It does not want to mark this fleece. Okay. So just cutting straight along, using the ruler as a guide. because there's 4 bits of polar fleece here, it is quite thick. Careful of fingers, I'll chop any fingers off. Okay, have a look. There we, oh, nearly. There we go. Okay, so now I've got my 4 bits. The next thing to do is to start sewing. Before we can take it to the machine, we're just going to put some clips or pins in place. So you're going to take each one as if it's an individual hat. It's not going to be by the end, but that's how we're going to treat them. So we're going to put pins just around the edges. Now mine has actually got some material already joined at the top. That's not going to stay like that by the end. So just put pins all the way down the side, or clips if you're using these cool clips. If you watched my school trouser video, you'll know that these clips don't really go so well with my sewing machine, and I tend to end up having to take them out before I get to them just because the way my sewing machine's set up. But on this sort of thing, where it's not a roll of material, a flat bit of material, they should be absolutely fine, because I'll be taking them out before we get to them anyway. Right. Oh, I've just folded that edge there. Don't want to do that. Okay, so that's that one done. Just do the same on the other. Okay, now we're ready to take both bits of the sewing machine and stitch them round those edges. Okay, the first thing I need to do is to change the colour of my bobbin. So I've got various different coloured threads here. Dunelm Mill had a sale on, so I think probably this colour works quite well. It's a sort of red pinky colour. Let me just get the camera in focus for you. There we go. And it's not going to show up too much, I don't think. That is quite normal. If you're not sure how to wind one, check with your machine instructions, or you might be able to find some online if you've never done it before. Okay, so I'm just going to put the thread through. To do that though, I need to trim the end of the thread, because otherwise it ends up being too frayed to be able to actually go through the hole. So feed it through one of the holes, but from the actual inside of the bobbin, and make sure you leave some thread out. Okay, come out from that screw bit, wrap that round onto the bobbin holder, and do that up. Now my bobbin winder is very, very squeaky, but here we go. Okay, that's my bobbin done. So I'm going to take that off, and then I can put it into my machine. Okay, now I've threaded my machine needle, I'm going to just do that, and that lifts up the bobbin thread. If you're not sure how to get your bobbin thread up, then just read your sewing machine's instruction manual. It will tell you. Now, if you watched my other video, you'll know what this is. This is a little magnetic seam guide or hem guide. So I'm just going to put that on. I have left a reasonable seam allowance, so I'm probably going to put it just slightly away from the foot, not very far. You might want a bigger seam allowance, it's up to you. Okay. Now we are ready to go. My stitching size is set to quite small at the moment. I'm actually going to increase that to number 2. I may do a zigzag stitch later, but at the moment I'm just going to do a straight stitch, because I need to try this out before we can actually sew it all together in the end. So we need to put our hat underneath. Which side should I start with? This side. And remove the first clip. Make sure that you do definitely have both edges lined up underneath, and I'm going to follow this seam allowance, and that should work out okay. So starting at the edge of the fabric, I'm going to do a few stitches forward and then back stitch. Okay, Now I can go all the way around. Whenever you stop on a machine, it's always best to put the needle down into the material. So on mine, I actually have a button here for doing that. You might not have that button, in which case, if you just use your manual wheel, then you'll find that works too. Okay, let's carry on. Now you'll notice, even though this bit is folded, I'm still going to stitch it because it will just make it neater overall. Okay, just get to the end of the bit of material and then back stitch just to secure the thread in place. Get it off. That's piece number 1. Ta-da! All done. Okay, do piece number 2, exactly the same.